Good evening, everyone. I hope that you all are doing well on this wonderful Monday evening. I've been looking forward to this conversation ever since I found out that I was going to be moderating this conversation for a number of reasons. But I think one of the main reasons is to have a sort of Southern African conversations about decrim and about concepts of queerness and how religion and society and the law plays a role. And it's absolutely wonderful to come and be in conversation with Kane, who is an advocacy manager at Likhabibo. We also have Ntutuzi, who is a programs manager at Iranti. And we have Chantal, essentially our protagonist and the reason why we are going to have this conversation. And it's absolutely exciting. But I think before we start, I wanted for us to take a moment of silence. When I woke up today, I went onto social media and I saw that another one of us had been killed because of our sexual orientation. So Anele Bengu was killed and her intestines were found outside of her. So I just wanted us to take a moment of silence to honor her life. Thank you so much. I wanted to talk about the 11th of June, 2019. I wrote a piece, the next day, and I started the piece by saying, just before midday on the 11th of June, 2019, many LGBTIQA+ activists were glued to their cell phones, refreshing Twitter feeds, following activists in Botswana as the court read the ruling to decriminalize same-sex relations. This ruling comes just a month after Kenya's High Court upheld its law criminalizing homosexuality. And I wanted to just start the conversation, then start with Ken and then move on to Chantal and then Ntutuzo to speak about, do you remember where you were and what were your feelings on the 11th of June, 2019?
Good evening, Ntahono, and thanks for doing this. It's always good to see you. For me, it's a simple answer. June 11, I was in court, eagerly waiting the court's decision. I was not mentally prepared for a negative outcome. I had prepared myself for a positive outcome, and I told myself, if we get a negative outcome, I'm out. I need to go and lick my wounds and figure out what's going on, because I was literally at a breaking point. I don't think I was ready to deal with potentially a negative outcome. So when the judgment was made and handed down in our favor, being an activist, my mind was already moving on to the next thing, saying, okay, they're going to appeal. So that means we're going to have to have community dialogues. We're going to have to teach people about this and that. The unfortunate thing about being an activist is that you never have time to stop and review what is going on. You never have time to stop and enjoy your victories, because the oppressors are always working 24/7. They are always figuring ways of making the next person's life miserable. So unfortunately, we also don't have that luxury of relaxing and sitting at home. So even when you triumph in one thing, you don't even have time to stop and enjoy the victory, because now you're literally moved on to the next thing. So June 11 was a good thing for me, but at the same time, it also meant a lot of work, because then I started thinking, it means I'm going to have to drive around the country to train people, to make sure that people understand what the judgment meant. So yeah, that's my reaction for June 11.
Chantal, where were you on June 11, 2019?
June 11, 2019, I was actually working, I was facilitating a retreat for LGBTI people of faith who, we call it Heart Sets on Pilgrimage, who would like to reconcile their faith with their sexuality. So I was actually in the room facilitating when the judgment was handed out. And I just went like, what? And then Kane has unfortunately transferred this illness of not just relaxing and enjoying the moment that, oh my gosh, we actually won. And now I was like, now what the hell are these religious leaders going to come up with this time around? How are we going to deal with them? Because there's going to be a backlash. And I was excited at the same time. I was just like, oh, what do we have to deal with now? What's coming, basically. But the excitement was there. We had to take a 15-minute break because the emotions were all over the place.
Ntutuzo?
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Thanks, Nolo, for hosting us. I think, like many South Africans who actually are part of the queer community, we were glued on social media. We were checking the news to see if there was going to be any updates on what's happening in Botswana. And like many of us, we actually knew that the victory of Botswana was not only a victory of Botswana or of Lekgabibo, but was going to be a victory for Africa and a victory, to take, the issue of, homophobia in Africa forward. And that's why when, Botswana was celebrating, South Africa was celebrating, many people around Africa were also celebrating. So I think also for myself, it was also a celebration, celebrating with O'Kane and celebrating with you, Chantel. So, but the difficulty again of, activists, and the question that, many of us had while we were in South Africa, what's going to happen afterwards, because we might ask for law reforms, but the hard work, the real work, happens after you've received, or after that law reform actually takes place. And that's the difficulty of being an activist, because the real work, you might actually go to court and you might try and put pressure on government to pass these laws, but the real work really does start happening after that law reform has actually been put there for us to use to drive our message forward.
I mean, we all know what brings us here, right? Is this wonderful docu-movie, The Power of the Collar, which, the moment Chantel said there is power in the collar, I was like, okay, Chantel, you've got it. But I wanted to speak about something that, a couple of things that emerged from the documentary, which I think we can reflect on. And I'll start with you, Chantel. I mean, Chantel, this is effectively your life, right, on display. And at the beginning of the documentary, someone says, love the sinner, but hate the sin, right? And I'm curious about that religiosity, right? This idea of separating someone from who they are. And what are some of your reflections upon, hearing people who are religious continuously saying that as someone who is religious and queer?
It's funny because I'm always very confused when people say love the sinner and not the sin. And sometimes this was taught to me a long time ago. People will always know the answer to a question until you ask them, what do you mean by love the sinner and hate the sin? How does that even make sense to anybody? Even me, that's a theology that I'm still struggling to understand as a person. And even when I've heard the countless justifications for it, or the countless ideologies, or like the concept that come from it, I'm still so confused, because I'm always like, what is the sinner and what is the sin, and how do you separate these two things? And please, you have to give me a little bit more than just love the sin and hate the sin. And I think for the longest time, as LGBTI people, or people who are in this community, we have always been taught that whatever you are given at the pulpit, that is the word of God. And even when religious people, they say it all the time, the Bible says, the Bible says, the Bible says. And if you take a Bible and you put it to your ear, the Bible doesn't say anything unless I give it a voice, or unless you, Lutrogonola, give it a voice, or unless Cain give it a voice. That's when it says something. And remember, when we read the Bible, we don't come to it empty. We come to it with experiences. We come to it with our own ideologies. We come to it with our own innate belief of what God is and how we're supposed to relate to this God and all these things. So that is not it's not enough. You cannot tell me my experience because you're not living my life. I am telling you, I'm not a sin. I'm not asking for permission, or I'm not asking you whether I'm a sin or not. I'm telling this is my experience, and this is the experience that I've had with my God that I serve and that has created me. So this concept of love, the sin, it doesn't make sense. But because we don't question a lot of things, it tends to make sense to the people who say this a lot. And because we internalize a lot of things, we shy away from asking questions, or we shy away now from questioning, where does this theology stem from? Where do you get it? How do you explain it to other people who still, like, people like, I want someone to still explain this to me, because this is a theology that I cannot relate to, So this thing of love the sinner and the sin, it doesn't hold water for me, and it shouldn't even be like an argument at all.
Thank you so much for that.
Humanity.
Thank you so much, Chantal. And Tutuzwa, I'm coming to you because I'm thinking about, in many ways, the documentary is sort of showing us what the power of media advocacy can look like, right? And what the purpose of media advocacy is. And I know that Iranti is a media advocacy group, but I wanted to know, what was the reason behind Iranti really putting their backs, right, and their money behind this project? Because one, it's in Botswana, right? What was the reason? And what do you think is important about media advocacy in this way?
Sorry, I forgot to mute. So Iranti actually does work with other African countries within the region. So we don't want to limit ourselves to only South Africa, because the issues that we face are also issues that are faced by others in Africa. And I think the documentary proves to you how powerful, the media can be in actually educating people and also changing, the status quo of a community. In the past, we've run workshops with journalists to try and sensitize them on how to report, on queer issues. And in some African countries, you find that when articles are released, for example, what happened in Uganda, where members of the LGBTI community were published on a really popular newspaper, and they were made targets of the community. They were made targets of people, for people who are homophobes, to identify them when they go on the streets. If they find one of the people who's actually on that article, they would be able to, point at them. And we have a long way to go as a continent, and we cannot depend on the old methods of doing activism. We currently are living in a world where technology is something that we all use. Probably right now while we are having this chat, I'm probably checking my Twitter or my Instagram and all of those things, and those things need to be utilized to actually to advocate for the rights of those who are marginalized, and also to advocate for freedom for all, because we can no longer be in a state where we put limitations on what freedom is. And each and every year, for example, here in South Africa, we're going to be pushed to go to the polls, while we currently see that there are hate crimes that are reported on a daily basis. And on a daily basis, the queer community is in a state of shock, state of, of being scared to walk on the street, of being scared to actually, go to clubs or to even go to the supermarket. And those are the things that we need to actually bring forward by using some of the tools that we utilize on a daily basis. And for example, our phones, and even the WhatsApp group chats that we participate in, those are also powerful tools of us, putting our message across on different issues.
I mean, I think it's a really powerful point that you make, right? I think often about like the elevation of hate crimes that have been elevated and made visible in South Africa and even around the continent isn't necessarily because of like extreme investigative journalism. It's in many instances where young queer people and queer people around the continent, right, and around the world are saying, this, we need to tell the world about this. So it's really important for you to say, I think an extension of the media advocacy that you speak about is using our phones and social media as a powerful tool. Ken, I want to come to you. I think about Lekhabibo as this just fantastic place that I enjoy. And, I kind of want to go to Botswana so I can just rock up with Lekhabibo because of all the programming that they do. But I think Lekhabibo played a really crucial role in the decriminalization case. When I read the judgment, and the many times that I've read the judgment, I think about like the real meat of the case and the real meat of the decision was because of the amicus interventions that Lekhabibo did. So I wanted to speak about the role of amicus, friends of the court in cases like these and how you think they can help towards legal reform.
Thanks, Mthogolo. The thing is that with amicus, before we even get to playing the role of amicus, one needs to understand the legal system. One needs to understand that it is important to weigh your case. It is important to check the environment. So what we decided to do was to adopt a more incremental approach kind of tactic, appreciating that the courts might not necessarily be ready for us to bombard them with tough questions that concerns us if they don't have anything to back them with. So before I get to that, I always ask myself this question, these two questions that I want people to always ask themselves. When will it be enough to appreciate that as people, we are different? When will it be enough for laws and policies to be changed to protect the LGBTI community without making them jump through hoops, without making them jump through fences, or without even exhausting them by turning them into research lab rats? Because it's about people's lives. Yet we keep, like, remember what, like for example, what Njeri said in the film. Like she mentioned, like one of the friends was so heartbroken that the friend was saying that basically, if we don't bring dead queer people's bodies and line them up in the courtroom, it seems like people will not want to engage. They will not want to accept. So for me, building on that case was very important. When we had planned on doing our own case, as Lekhabibo, we had structured ourselves how we're going to do it. Because, for example, this law does not only affect the LGBTI community. That's what most people don't get. This law is general in its own totality if you don't go too deep. It's general, meaning that if Cain is a heterosexual man and is involved with a heterosexual woman, and they engage with the so-called sex against the order of nature, they are also guilty of an offense and they will be tried before the courts of laws. But by practice, because people have a tendency to pay attention to queer bodies, they have a tendency to pay attention to the LGBTI community. it seemed like the law only criminalized being LGBTIQ, but that was not the case. So people always thought they were free to do whatever if you are heterosexual, but that was not the case. So we had wanted to bring our own case, and the way we had structured this was we're going to bring in parents elaborating or saying that piece, mentioning why it's important as a parent, why they think this law should be changed and how it affects their children and how it affects their lives from the family setup. We had wanted to bring in medical professionals. We had wanted to bring in traditional leaders, parents, teachers, guidance and counselors. We had even wanted to bring in heterosexual couples. But there was an individual who already had started the process. So we figured, since we can't stop that train, which has already left the station, we have to run and jump on board. So that's when we decided to restructure everything. It meant that we had to be alive to what is happening in our courts. We had to pay attention. So we then decided to jump on board, because for many years we've been working on collecting data. We've been working on changing things. Let's go back maybe a couple of years. Let's go back to 2003. There is a precedence for a case called Kanani versus the state, where in handing down the judgment, the highest court in Botswana, which is a court of appeal, had said that they had said two things. Botswana was not yet ready to decriminalize homosexuality. And number two, the LGBTI community then did not constitute a community that needed protection. So when we started attempting to register Lekhabibo, we had those things in mind, those two lines, those two phrases from the choir courts. What we wanted to do was to build evidence to come and demystify that myth that Botswana is not yet ready to decriminalize. We wanted to collect evidence to show that the LGBTI community constituted a community that needed protection. So that's what we've been doing throughout the years. So we figured when this case went before the courts, LM versus the state, we were like, okay, because this person is not an activist, they don't pay attention to all the other things. So what we had to do, our interest was make sure that the court sees this in a bigger picture, from a bigger perspective, to know that this case is beyond just this one individual. This case, it might have been brought before the courts of laws by LM, but whatever judgment that's going to come out of it is going to affect multitudes of people. Hence why we applied to be an amicus curiae. And it's a very important provision that we have before the courts of laws. So it's one thing that we always have to strive. One of the court processes that we should always take advantage of. When there is a case that we feel like maybe this case is not strong enough, and maybe the person is not, let's say, for argument's sake, the person is not willing to engage with the civil society, is not willing to engage with all of us as activists, you have to force your way into the case, because the idea is for you to demonstrate that this case is not just about this individual. Whatever the outcome, it's going to affect many more people. That's why we decided to do the amicus curiae route.
I mean, thank you, and also thank you for mentioning, the case of 2003, because we sort of saw that the same rhetoric happened in Kenya, where what happened in Kenya, essentially the court said, we are saying no because society is not ready. And so the question that I want to pose to all three of you, and I'll start with you, Chantal, is, a lot of what the documentary also shows us is that as much as we want legal reform helps us achieving social change, but social change is more important because, yes, the law may say this, but these people live in a certain society, right? And these people have to continue living in that society. So I want to talk about some of the social work that you do, right? Some of the workshops and the education that you do, and why you think those are important to go in tandem with legal reform in a place like Botswana.
I mean, social change, like, first and foremost, I work mainly in the religious sectors. So And what you would hear most of the time, even in the documentary, one of the pastors from the evangelical churches were like, as Christians, we don't agree with this judgment. As Christians, we don't, that kind of thing that he was saying. And we all live in a society, like you already said. We go to church. I've been going to church since I could walk. So I live in a society. I go to church and I live with people, but I don't live my life to the fullest that I am supposed to live it. Because first of all, I am fighting the demons within me, or not the demons, or the voices within me that is saying, that I've heard from my setting in the church, that's saying I'm a sin, that I am a demon, that there are people who can change me. And then I'm fighting myself, and I'm fighting a community around me that is also telling me the same thing, that I am a sin, that like all of these voices that's going on. But how I am like myself as a person, I like what people are saying is not what's happening within me as a person. Like my attraction towards other women, it's not something that I'm learning from the outside world. It's something that is happening. It's just happening. I can't even explain it. So what people are saying and what's happening in my body and nature, let's use that word since it's used a lot and people are saying it's unnatural and what. We actually get put in a place where now you're between a rock and a hard place, where you now need to start teaching people that no, this is not what, like, I don't even know how to explain this, but the reason why we have PFLEX and we have programs like Heart Sets on Pilgrimage, and we have dialogues with religious leaders, is because we're coming to these people and introducing ourselves to them in the society. Because for the longest time, people had said we don't exist, or religious leaders can go to an extent of saying, how we have never seen a gay person. How does a gay person, this is like real life things that happen in dialogues. How does a gay person look like? And you were thinking, does this person think a gay person has horns and a tail that would like differentiate them from other people? Because those, as silly as they sound, these are the ideologies that people have when we talk about things that are not something that they're used to, like difference for just difference. So we have to come back and say, like, we have to hold meetings, we have to educate people, we have to have conversations with religious leaders, we have to question suspicious ideologies about sexual minorities. Because if we don't, the violence, the abuse, the authority that they give themselves above our lives to say that, you know what, I have the right to say, as a Christian, we don't agree with this judgment, but I'm a Christian too. Who gave you, did God come to you and say, you're a better Christian than I am? Or I'm a lesser Christian because I'm different in the way my attraction is. Like, so it's important to always question and have conversations. And sometimes when you see, like, when you have conversation, things change. People tend to go like, oh, but I've never really thought about it in that way. I've never really thought about a gay person being a human being. And we have those changes, and people start, like, when you start, I believe like stories changes people's perspective of people, because we live with people every day, but they don't know our stories and they don't know the harm that they're causing just by standing at the pulpit and saying, let's kill all the gays.
I mean, I think that's such important reflections, just to think about. Sometimes maybe people don't understand and you just telling them, right? Because I liked a particular scene in the film where, you were saying, actually, this is what the Bible says and this is what the Bible doesn't say. And in many instances, it felt like a light bulb moment for people to be like, oh, maybe we haven't been reading the Bible for our own understanding, but what we've been doing is just listening to what, as you said, whatever is said on the pulpit is the truth, right? And Tutuzo, I want to come to you and think about some of the work that Iranti does in order to ensure social change. I think about one of the most important things that I think Iranti has done. I mean, they've done a lot of important things, but the documenting of hate crimes, right, in South Africa as a way to show the government, hello, we're not making this stuff up, right? But I want to talk a little bit about the Safety, Dignity, and Freedom project that Iranti does. This idea of like including journalists into the conversations and including LGBTI people into conversation, and how you think that project assists in reform and in bringing about social change.
I think it's a conversation that was long overdue to begin with. Some of the reporting that we've seen is really problematic, and I don't want to say in other African countries, also in South Africa, where you find that individuals are actually, misgendered, and these media houses, like they're insensitive at certain moments, where as someone who's a queer body, you find that it's too much for you to even check the news. And even with the hate crimes that we've been noticing, certain individuals have decided to pull back and stop reading, the latest news on who has passed away, because it's quite triggering. And it's a moment where the LGBTI community is quite sensitive towards such issues. And we are hoping that journalists will also understand that there's like an element of, of being how can I say this? There's an element of them not caring how what they report in will affect those who are part of the community. And our biggest push as Iranti has been to try and get journalists to sit, to sit with us and also understand the implications that their own reporting actually has on people's lives. And Chantal, you are right. Like many times people don't even regard us as actually as humans. We're not seen as humans. And the obsession about, even from religious leaders here in South Africa also, it's always about the sexual act. These questions which they always pose to us about like, how do you have sex? And they'll say it's un-African, but in my own knowledge of the African culture, sexual act is something that's very, private, that you should not be discussing with everyone. So that whole obsession from these church leaders on like, our own sexuality, and the mere fact that it's pushed that we decided one day that we were going to tick a box that, today I want to be gay, or today I want to be lesbian. It's those type of discussions that we wanted to start with journalists, for them to first to be sensitized themselves about, LGBTI issues, but also to move ahead to teaching them how best to actually report on, such issues, not only in their countries, but also in the whole world. Because what you write in South Africa, someone in Botswana, someone in Uganda might have access to it because of, the global age that we live in.
Chantal, I want to come back to you, and I want to speak a little bit about some Black queer joy. I think that oftentimes when we have these conversations, we tend to focus on the negative a lot more than focus on the positive. But there is this one scene in the film, right? The washing line scene. And every time I watch it, there's just like such glee that fills my heart, right? And I want to speak about like the idea of like, creating joy as a Black queer person in a world that, that seeks to erase us as Black queer people. How are, and both of you, Ntutuzi and Chantal, how do you create joy, right? for yourself, and how do you participate in joy as queer people in countries that we live in?
I think the first thing is how you, oh, I'm sorry guys, this person is here now. How you create joy is, I think it's this cliche where people always say it starts within you, starts within the person. If you know yourself and you know who you are and you understand, I'm going to be a little bit religious, a lot, and you understand where you are with your Lord or your Maker. I don't think you have built a foundation for yourself that's not, it can be shaken, but it can be moved. So you are happy with yourself, you know who you are, it's not always like a dark, gloomy cloud. There are people who will always, there will always be people who will appreciate you for who you are and love you for who you are. So I can't tell people how they need to create their own joy, but I think having reflection with yourself and knowing who you are as a person and being able to always not be shaken by some people saying, hey, you big-headed lesbian here again. And then I'm like, oh my God, they found me out. No, I think, so you just go like, okay, I'm a big-headed lesbian. So what does that have to do with anything? And I think it's just something that you create within yourself. And if you understand yourself, and that's basically it. There's no big secret to it. It's just that if you understand yourself, know yourself, love yourself, and I think how we treat ourselves, we teach other people also how to treat us, and then that creates joy for yourself.
Ntutuzo?
Yeah, it's internalizing self-love. On a daily basis, you wake up in the morning, you look at yourself and you're like, God damn, you are a beautiful gay man or lesbian woman. Just be happy with who you are. Because the biggest harm that we have as individuals is the fact that there's self-hatred because of the social constructs from society. So if you start with yourself in the morning, when you walk out of that door, wherever you are going, if you know and you've accepted yourself, whatever people might say, it will not have an impact on you. And that's something that, we need to remind ourselves from time to time that, I'm happy with who I am, and whatever that might be said outside when I actually leave these premises. And it's going to be hard, but you need to push and actually, constantly reflect and actually look at yourself and be proud of who you are. Because at the end of the day, you did not tick a box. As I said before, you did not tick a box to become what you are. You were born like this.
Thank you so much. Ken, I'm going to come to you for a moment. One of the questions that I have, and I see an audience member ask the question, which I'm really grateful for, is what do you think the impact of the case has on the lives of transgender people? And this is also in line with when you watch the film, there is a spotlight on violence perpetuated against a trans woman in Botswana. But what do you think the case has had? What impact has the case had on the lives of transgender people? And what strategies did Lekgabibo use to ensure that it goes beyond another gay or bi or lesbian case?
Okay. Perhaps before I get to that, it's worth mentioning that Botswana already has a good precedence of 2 cases that were specifically around trans diverse community, where 2 individuals were attempting to have their national identity documents aligned to the people that they were. So one was born with an identity document that said M, but the individual identifying as female, and they have to take the difficult route, go through the courts, and deal with this for what, about 7 years or so. So also, people need to understand also that identifying as trans and then having started your transition, whether hormonal therapy or affirming surgery, and you still have identity documents that still speak to the old Cain, it's a problem. So what we are basically saying to those individuals is like, okay, put your life on hold up until we deal with you in the courts of laws. Mind you, the other court process took about 7 years. So in the meantime, we are basically saying to the person, put your life on hold, forget about applying for business opportunities, forget about applying to become an employee somewhere, because when you go for an interview, you still have to show your identity documents to show that you are Motswana. So that if you're not a Motswana, you have to show your permit, work permit and stuff. So if you get there and your identity document says this, and you being an individual saying that, then you are not able to have that employment. So it's about, we're telling people, trans-identifying people, that put your life on hold. Your life doesn't matter now up until we deal with you. So we're not allowing people to progress, because in Botswana, we have scholarships, bursaries for students to study abroad. Some of them are not able to get those things because for you to go and apply for bursaries, you need to present your identity document. And if your identity document says you're Cynthia Youngman, and you come with beards like me, it becomes a problem. You're not going to get that scholarship, and you won't be able to go. Some individuals who had to travel for many years, who had to travel with passports that still spoke to their old self, day in, day out, they had their passport moving from one customs office or one immigration office at point of entries, be it at the border or at the airport. So they had to deal with those things throughout the years. So what this case was basically doing, the case is just saying, it was bringing attention to the fact that in Botswana, there is diversity. In Botswana, there is diversity. In Botswana, everybody has the right to dignity. The case spoke to four main arguments. They spoke to four things on the Constitution. It spoke to right to dignity. So in other words, as trans-identifying individuals, there is no dignity in going around with an Omang identity documents that says female when you don't identify as female. There is no dignity when you are not able to be employed because your identity documents are saying otherwise. There is no dignity in not being able to feed yourself because you are unable to progress in life because of your identity documents. It spoke about right to liberty. You are at liberty to choose a partner of your choosing, as long as their partner also consents to you being their partner. That on its own shed light to the trans-diverse community. In other words, basically saying to them, you are at liberty to be who you are. If you identify as M, but your identity document says F, that should not be a problem. It should be the problem of the National Births and Deaths Registrar. So you have that constitutional right. You have that liberty to be who you are. It spoke about privacy. We all have that right. It spoke about protection against inhuman and degrading treatment. So I think his introducer talked about being traumatized over and over again, being misgendered over and over again. So having to deal with identity documents that are speaking to an older Cain, not this Cain, it's a problem. Every day, it's an emotional torture. It's an emotional torture. So what this case was basically doing was basically trying to demonstrate to Botswana at large that there is diversity. So what we've been doing, we've been moving around the country trying to push the LGBTIQ community to step up and demand their rights. We're trying to push people to utilize, to make sure that people are able to go and demand, to go and demand their rights. So if somebody wants to change their identity documents, we're trying to push for them, we've been trying to push for them to make that happen. Just last year, we launched a booklet that gave guidance to the process that is involved in changing one's identity documents in Botswana. So that document is meant to guide the Ministry of Nationality, Immigration and Gender Affairs. And that's the ministry that houses the department that helps change the identity documents. For me, all of this still goes back to one major problem, and this problem is control. As people, as citizens of this country, as citizens of this continent, as citizens of this world, we are hell-bound on controlling people. We are hell-bound on controlling every single thing, even things that don't concern us. In the film, you've heard Sia talk about, I don't understand how my life engaging in a sexual relations with another person affects the next person. So it's basically what the decriminalisation was about. It's saying that one of the reasons why the judges said the 167 of the penal code should be taken down. The decrim case was taken, had asked for 3 provisions of the penal code to be taken down. One, it was 164, which spoke about having carnal knowledge of another person against the order of nature, or allowing another person to have carnal knowledge of you against the order of nature. 2, it spoke about the intention to commit 164. And 3 was 167, which talked about gross indecency. So gross indecency was saying any person who commits gross indecency, whether in public or in private. So the question was also that if Cain is disgusting to maybe Letokonolo, and Cain is disgusting in his own house, how is he being disgusting to Letokonolo when Letokonolo is not there? So that was the question. It's like, why is privacy included in there? Why is private included in that provision? If you are being said to be disgusting, for you to see the disgust, you have to be there, right? I can't say, oh, I can feel in my old bones that somebody's doing this somewhere. I'm feeling disgusted. So that doesn't hold water. So the other thing that Chantel talked about was when she was addressing the issue of social change. One thing that we need to always remind ourselves, I know it might be an uncomfortable truth, is that religion is a personal choice. Religion, every individual chooses to believe in what they feel comfortable with. Every individual chooses to align themselves to a certain faith or a certain group under a certain faith. So we cannot then at the end of the day want the next person who also has a choice, a constitutional choice, to believe in something or not to believe in something. And at the end of the day, we still want to insist on bulking everybody to believe in what we believe in. It's wrong. We really need to talk about control. Why people like control.
I also wanted to talk about a really important thing that I think emerged from both your reflections on the film and Chantal's reflection. And I wanted Nduduzo to also come in here. We don't talk, and I mean, there has been a lot of renewed conversations and more visibility around mental health and around how it's sort of rejection, ostracizing may lead to some of us taking or dying by suicide. So I wanted to speak a little bit about that, right? Like, the idea of like how many of us suffer from mental health because we've been rejected and because we've been ostracized, and how, you know, what are your reflections about that? I can start with you, Nduduzo.
That's a hard one. Yeah, I think on a daily basis, we hear of, young high school kids who have committed suicide because of rejection from, society, because of uh, their sexual orientation. Or we hear of activists that leave the space because they have to go heal, um, or they have to go and recover by themselves. Um, I think the issue of mental health is one which is very complex, and people are starting to talk about mental health after COVID, and people are assuming that the issue of mental health is a new concept, but with many of us who actually are queer borders, it's something that we've struggled with for several years because of our upbringings and the social constructs um, that we had to endure as kids and even when we were growing up, and how we were told what we need to look like, that Ndoni, I need to make sure that my hair is always cut, I can't have dreadlocks as a young boy, and also the institutionalized and also the institutionalized homophobia that is also pushed even by a so-called progressive government as ours, where you find that certain institutions also contribute towards, um, towards just challenging your own well-being. And I liked the question you actually posed to Kane, because I think it's also related to the question that you are posing right now. One of the biggest things that we always run away from here in South Africa is the fact that um, people who identify or people who are intersex and those who are transgender still experience a lot of oppression when they enter government institutions um, here in South Africa. Kane, when you were actually talking, if you didn't mention Botswana, one would actually think that you're talking about South Africa, because that's still the same pain that trans and intersex and gender non-binary individuals still experience even when they walk into a hospital. Even when you enter a police station to just go report a case, you find that even the person you're reporting to, they're still misgendering you. At the same time, questioning you about your own sexuality. Why are you like this? Are there not enough, females out there for you to be sleeping with other men? And all of those things are quite triggering. And even maybe after the session, if I walk out of here and maybe take a cab, I'll probably still experience that. So it's like something which is ongoing that we constantly experience, and which has been built by society, and it's not being challenged enough by the general society, but it's made a responsibility of us as the queer community that we need to be able to heal ourselves. It is important for us to take care of ourselves, but the pressure from society plays a major role on our mental wellness, and the oppressive behavior that we experience also from family relatives and also from government play a major role in pulling us back, even if we move 10 steps forward as a community, but all of those different things still actually pull us back as a community. Because we might be on the streets, we might be smiling and have these discussions, but there's still a lot that we still have to go through as individuals and members of the queer community.
Chantal, any reflections?
I mean, he has said it all. I hope I'm not misgendering you. I'm not seeing you. What we don't realize is that our mental health, even though it's something internal, it manifests also in the way we live our daily lives, in the way we relate to other people, in the way we just be in society. Sometimes it takes a fatal turn and people commit suicide. It becomes fatal, and we also abuse people that we live with. It just manifests in our own life. And it's so we're talking about these issues as if they're separated, but it's they have this English word, I don't even know how to say, intersectionality. There's somewhere where they meet, and then we manifest it in how we live our lives as human beings. And sometimes it's not the best way of how we're supposed to live it. Like you have already said, it's just the conversation that's happening after COVID. But people have been living with a lot of anxiety. Some of us still live with anxiety till this day. We're just still trying to figure out how, and also just, I'm not trying to stereotype Black people, but this is not things we take seriously. People will say, "Eh, you are crazy. I'm starting again with your things," and then we start making memes about this and stuff. This is just how we manifest and how we try to deal with things that are uncomfortable and how we don't know how to deal with. So it's.
I also have a question from you from one of the audience members. Their reflection is, I was struck by a pro-LGBTI members of the church and their show in the form. Have there been any shifts in the opinion and solidarity by members of the church since the film's release?
I don't think a lot of people have seen this this film, but with the conversations that are happening, you can see that we are getting more and more allies. It also helps a lot, especially when we involve our parents. Because our parents also go to churches, and they've known us before we've started knowing ourselves. So if someone comes like Marcos and Zadie and say, "Hey, what are you saying about my child? I'm the one who carried this child for 9 months. What are you saying?" It helps shift people's mindsets and how they think. And also this argument people use about it's unnatural. Come on, let's look at nature. Apples are not the only fruits. And also within apples, there are green apples, there are yellow apples, there are red apples. So why do we have this thought that even with people, it's not the same concept? There's people, human beings, we are different colors, we are different race, we have different ethnicities. What makes people think that then there's only going to be heterosexuals in the world? It doesn't make sense. Nature also just demystifies this thing of heterosexuals being the only people who live in the world. Even just, I mean, diversity lives in nature, and people always say we must look in nature. These things are not there in nature, but nature all the time, nature says, girl, don't be talking about me like that. I didn't say none of that. And at this point, I don't know how more to explain that. It is what we are here to stay. We are just here to stay. We will not disappear anywhere.
Thank you so much. Ken, I want to come to you a bit and just to have some final reflections. And to the audience members watching on Facebook and here through Zoom, if you have any questions, any reflections, please share them with us at this point. So in the piece that I wrote, talking about the Botswana decriminalization, I write, the decision is important as law can be a catalyst to create social change. Decriminalization will immediately result in full equality before the law. And we know obviously in a place like Botswana, it's not full equality, it's some form of equality. The other major fight that we may want to take on is same-sex marriage in Botswana, for instance. But I go on further, I say, the Botswana ruling proclaims that queer people matter in their Blackness, in their queerness, in their Africanness. It allows us to shout on mountaintops with joy and say, we are queer and we are here. And I want to sort of ask you, what do you think it meant for queer Botswana people, you know, for this judgment to still not have been overturned or been appealed? What does it mean for queer Botswana people right now?
Okay. The judgment on itself is saying to Botswana basically, basically for us, the way we interpret it, it's basically the court saying to us, oppression where on you, not in our watch, not when we are still here, basically. So the judgment means a lot to us because it takes away one of the reasons, not reasons as such, but one of the excuses many people have always used to claim why to justify their violence towards the LGBT or to justify their hatreds towards the LGBT identifying individuals. So it takes away that thing. It basically means also to us that it's okay for us to be who we are without fearing that something will be done to us. It's okay for us to be who we are. It's okay to accept. It's okay for you if you feel aggrieved to go before the courts of law. So what this judgment has basically done for us, it means that right now we have started seeing an increase in cases of LGBTI people being abused. But this is not necessarily because the environment is getting hostile, but it's mostly because now people have faith on the judicial system of Botswana. People have faith in the courts to say, oh, so we can be protected before the courts of laws. So, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and report my case and follow it through. Previously, people would call in, will tell us or inbox us, and they will say to you that such and such a thing happened to me, such and such a thing happened to my friend. But I'm just telling you so you know. I don't want you to take the case to court. I don't want you to take the case to the police because I fear the repercussions might be worse than it is now. If it's an issue of my employment having been terminated because I identify as LGBTI, I fear if I decide to take this matter to task, if I decide to go all the way to the highest court in the land, I might remain unemployable in the future. People will say, oh, this is the Lothagonlo who took the case to court. This is the gay person who's called Cain who did 1, 2, 3. So you will come in and you will not be employed. So these are some of the things that happen. But it has, for me, the most positive outcome of the case is that it gave us faith. It gave us belief in ourselves that we are actually also appreciated by other people. And we have the courts who actually take their jobs very, very seriously. Chantel also talked about mental health. I don't know if people are aware of the excruciating mental burden that we as activists have to deal with. On a daily basis, we have people coming to you with their problems. And remember, not all of us have been trained psychologists. Not all of us are social workers. We are not trained to deal with people's problems. But because there are not that many people who are willing to do this, because we want to see the change, because we want to protect our younger siblings who happen to be LGBTIQ. So in our own incapacitated being, we just go ahead. We dive in headfirst when somebody calls and say 1, 2, 3 happened to us. Without even thinking, we jump in to go and help. And that on its own causes a lot of us activists to end up having burnout or to end up having all of these mental health problems because we have to deal on daily basis. And the thing is that when you come out, to you, it might be a simple gesture of just letting some of your friends know. But at the same time, when you come out, you are indirectly saying to other LGBTIQ identifying individuals, I am here, I'm comfortable with who I am. So feel free to come to me and talk to me. You're indirectly saying that because the moment you come out and the moment you are visible, people are going to come to you whether you're inviting them or not. The moment you are out, you're basically inviting people to do that. And once that starts to happen, then your mental health starts depreciating a bit because you still have to deal with these things. But that has not deterred us. We carry on as crippled as we might be, as we'll stumble all the way to the finishing line. We'll stumble all the way to the safety of our community, come rain or shine. But that's the one thing that we need to address, mental health, because like the other two speakers have rightly said, mental health in our culture is seen as just a luxury, is seen as just something that people, just the words that people throw around that don't necessarily mean anything. Yeah. So, wait, what was your question again?
You've answered it. It's fine. You've answered it. Thank you.
Okay, because once I start talking, yeah.
Okay, so we have a question from Wandile who would like to ask a question live. So we'll allow them to ask the question and then, yeah, then we'll wrap up. Okay, it seems that we're having some challenges, but thank you everyone for joining us to have this discussion about this very important film. As you know, that it will still be showing until the 20th of June. So please, if you haven't seen it yet, please go ahead and see it and also encourage other people to see it. It's really important for us to begin to have these conversations. And thank you to Nduduzo, to Chantal, and to Kane for being such wonderful panelists. And hello to the little one. We also appreciate you coming to show some love. But thank you once again for joining us for this really important conversation. Have a good night further.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Hello, Leila.
Cute, man.